It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
It's the Spokesman-Review Zags Insiders Podcast.
Here we go.
Here's Jim Meehan and Richard Fox.
Welcome back to the Zags Basketball Insiders Podcast. Jim Meehan from the Spokesman-Review, Richard Fox from television fame locally and worldwide. Interesting week for the Zags. Just one game. Went to Seattle. Promising start. Not so good on the finish, Foxy. We'll get to that. We'll get to why it happened, what's coming up next with UConn in the Garden in New York City. Another big test for GU. But first off, rankings, of course, haven't been released yet. As of our taping, I would expect the Zags will drop maybe into the 9-10 range. Possibly out of the top 10. They did remain in the top 5 in the net, which is far more valuable in terms of what might happen in March. They're number 3. I think they've been as high as number 2. And Kentucky's at 5, which, they've got a couple of the best wins in the country. They beat Gonzaga in Seattle, and they beat Duke on a neutral floor. And Duke's clearly a national title contender as well. I think all the above are when you get right down to it. Nobody's standing out. But Foxy, do you think this changes maybe the seed line or any of the opinions of Gonzaga nationally with what they've done now at 7-2?
Probably not, just because I think Kentucky's been well regarded. I think folks are looking at them as a legitimate Final Four type of team, and there's nothing about Saturday night that would indicate otherwise. After losing to Clemson, I personally had some questions to see, kind of how legit were they, and for at least 25 minutes they were awfully legit in that second half and overtime. But no, it's not. I don't think that the perception of Gonzaga has probably changed much. Certainly we could talk about this. Gonzaga doesn't get as many bites of the apple with respect to getting these marquee wins. And it's got to sting a bit to have both of your losses come in overtime and effectively a possession or two. Once we turn the page here on the calendar year, we're going about 60, 70 days before Gonzaga might have another test like that. So, I think it's probably more, centralized in Spokane, and for those of us that follow Gonzaga, awfully close. Just a disappointing outcome. But no, I think from a national perspective, it probably hasn't changed. But what's changed for me, Jim, and I'd love to hear your thought, is I look at college basketball, and I would have told you a week ago, certainly 2 weeks ago, that I thought maybe there were 8 or 10 teams that were Final Four caliber teams. I think you got to double that. I mean, you see the struggles. I mean, Kansas loses twice in a week. Kentucky loses to a Clemson team that's not going to be as good as they were last year. They went to the Elite Eight. There's just so much. You're the word guy. Is there another word for parity? I feel like that's all we ever say. No. But
that is the word this year.
Yeah. There are no great teams. There are really a lot of really, really good teams. I think Gonzaga is right there with any of them. But the takeaway for me here in this young season is anybody can get beat. There is no one that is, forget about, 3 or 4 levels above the rest, not even a level. It's just remarkable. And I know that we've been trending this way. But boy, I think the NIL has really accelerated kind of the flattening out of talent across certainly college basketball. And I think we're seeing that a bit in college football too.
Yeah, no, I think you're dead on there. It makes it even more remarkable what UConn has done the last 2 years in the tournament. I don't think they've had a single-digit victory in 2 straight tournaments.
I know.
If they have, it was 9 or 10, 8 or 9 or something like that. And then Baylor the one year when they beat the Zags in the title game, they kind of marched through the March Madness. But 9 times out of 10, that doesn't happen. It is a battle when you get to March. The teams are so close, so good. I'm expecting more of a wide open a situation this year. UConn, I think, is working its way back up to being viable for number 3 in a row. Watched a little bit of that game yesterday at Texas. They were pretty impressive on the road, and also got a win over Baylor earlier in the week. But we'll get more to UConn here in a second. Let's go back through the battle in Seattle. It was something. I did not see any kind of comeback coming for Kentucky after that first half. Gonzaga was just at the top of its game. Offensively, as fluid as you can be. Nemhard took over. Graham Ike, unstoppable inside. They were hitting shots. They were moving the ball. They kind of did whatever they want. And then the wheels got a little less air in them as that game went on. And Kentucky, to their credit, made some adjustments. They threw a zone out there, a 1-3-1 that I don't know if it, Gonzaga still, in my opinion, Gonzaga still got a bunch of good shots. I went back and watched it because that's all what the guys and Coach Few talked about after the game. And you hear that when you're a reporter, you hear that all the time. We just missed shots. So I went back and watched, and they missed shots. They missed a lot of good shots, 3 balls especially. And even inside, Graham had a couple. The one at the end of regulation was a good look, 8-10 feet, just a touch too hard. I still remember Dusty driving baseline, reverse lay-in, swirls the rim, comes out, he gets it. He's about 5 feet away. Bank shot does the exact same thing. I thought their looks were pretty good. I thought if they could have hit a 3 here and there, timely 3, went 0 for 9 in the second half, that they could have stretched that lead and maybe taken a little, juice out of Kentucky's comeback. Quite a change from first half to second half. What'd you see as that game wore on?
Yeah, I mean, I think more than one thing can be true. That was a great college basketball game, but also felt like a really strange game. If both of those things can happen in the course of the same college basketball game, you're absolutely right. I mean, sometimes it just comes down to missing shots. Gonzaga shoots their worst 3-point percentage of the season. They were a blistering 3 of 12 from 3 in the first half, and then 0 of 9 in the second. And a lot of those were just what we would call naked threes, where there's no one around you. And to your point about missing some gimmies around the basket, I thought Ike certainly had 2 that I'm sure he would love to have back, maybe 3. That's a great sequence to highlight for Dusty, who I thought played well and probably could have played a little bit more. And there's a lot of places you can look. I mean, from the free throw line, Gonzaga 9 of 10 in the first half, 7 of 12 in the second. Really the worst performance from the line they've had this year. I know against Baylor they were 8 of 13, so from a percentage perspective they were lower, but they shot under 71%, the same percentage they shot against Long Beach State, but it doesn't really matter against Long Beach State because you're going to overwhelm them all over the floor. But against a team like Kentucky, you've got to make these free throws. And it just felt like the ball wasn't going to go in the second half. But, I probably for our listeners over the age of 40 or 45, I probably make a lot of sense to them. I'm sure there you go, Jim, raise your hand. I think for those that are a little bit younger, they probably think I harp on this stuff too much. But to me, it's the rebounding. And you look at the dominance Gonzaga had up front in the first half versus the balance of the game. And Gonzaga +9 in the rebound column in the first half, +10 points in the paint, shot 70% from inside the arc. Just dominate, overwhelmed Kentucky. Kentucky just 37% inside the arc. I thought Gonzaga did a great job of both keeping Kentucky in front on the perimeter, but also just challenging at the rim and making Williams and Carr really have to work. Garrison got a few buckets, but those 2 starters really struggled. In the second half, Kentucky rather is +7 on the glass, +6 points in the paint. Gonzaga's field goal percentage drops by 12 around the basket, 58%. While Kentucky shoots better than 60. It just the way it flipped around the basket to me was really remarkable. And it's just it's an interesting game. I mean, you look at turnovers, steals, assists, rebounds, offensive rebounds for the balance of the game. everything's flat. It just came down to missing shots. And I just think Kentucky's physicality and aggressiveness around the basket in the second half overwhelmed Gonzaga's bigs in a way that we just are not accustomed to seeing.
Yeah, no, I was exactly gonna say that coming up, but when I was doing the article this morning on the follow from the game, I think the Zags had 2 turnovers in the last 25 minutes. I mean, that's a half and plus. That's hard to do against 5-on-0 in practice. I mean, and the shot quality was pretty good. I just felt like that second half cried out for 1 or 2 makes. They didn't have to go 4 of 9, just 2 of 9 would have probably given them that cushion again, made it a little more desperate for Kentucky, a little more pressure, and it just didn't happen. And I think because of that, the inside game was bottled up a little more. They didn't have to get out to the perimeter as much. But I do give Kentucky credit, as you said. They totally flipped it physicality wise. And they did that against Clemson. They got their butt kicked on the glass in the first half and came back and won the glass by like 9 or 10. So I don't know what that's all about, but they did the exact same thing against Gonzaga. Way more physical with the post. It seemed like watching it, they must have had 7, 8 dunks in the last half and 2 in the overtime right out of the gate. Just lots of room in there. The dribble handoff was working great. Their spacing and cutting is very different than most offenses that you see. Mark Pope he's got wide open spaces there. And I thought the Zags really got a little bit lost defensively. They were chasing, guys were wide open. So as much as we talk about the missed shots, defense and rebounding was as equally as important, in my opinion.
Yeah, Kentucky changed their defensive scheme there in the second half. We saw them drop back into a zone and then quickly, after a pass or 2, depending on what they wanted to do, get into man-to-man. And, I think they kind of stumbled into Robinson playing point for them when Kriisa went out. And that changed the matchup. They were a lot bigger on the perimeter with Brea. The kid out of Oklahoma, his name is escaping me. Is it Ome?
Ote.
Ote, thank you.
Owe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Now you're big across that entire backcourt. You've got Carr and Williams on the back line, and they're dropping it at 1-3-1. And now I thought it made life difficult for Gonzaga offensively, where in the first half, and much like the game in Kentucky last year, that high pick and roll was really fruitful for Gonzaga. There was a lot less of that in the second half, and it felt like Kentucky's junking it up defensively. You after 3 or 4 possessions at most, you see what they're doing. So you want to just swing the ball, make quick decisions, force them to get man to man, and then you can get into that high pick and roll. And Gonzaga did a little bit of that, but because of that zone, you saw a lot less of that action for Gonzaga. And last 10 minutes in particular, now Ryan's trying to make a play in that pick and roll or just off the bounce with a 6'4", 6'5", 6'7" defender versus Kriisa, who's 6'2" and not the swiftest athlete, plays hard, kind of crafty, but not nearly the resistance that those other guys presented in the second half. And I think the defense that Kentucky had was good in that it limited how much Gonzaga's bigs could get involved. But to be fair, Gonzaga's bigs just didn't shoot the ball well in the second half. 7 of 17 versus 9 of 18 in the first half, but just Gonzaga got to the line more with their post players in the first half, a lot more foul pressure on. I'm trying to look at it. I mean, EK had how many free throws? 14 free throws in the game. He's 5 of 6 in the first half, 4 of 8 the rest of the game. Converted at the line. So, I think you give Kentucky a lot of credit. Gonzaga certainly, sometimes just simplifying it makes the most sense that if we make a couple shots in the second half, we win. And Kentucky's really good. They're not going to fold, they're not just going to fold over and we're not going to have another experience like Baylor But I still think it's okay to be really disappointed in how you played. And it's not just making shots. It felt like Kentucky's approach was better. Their toughness was at a higher level. And I don't think Gonzaga really adjusted as well as we might come to expect against
Yeah.
some of the things Kentucky was doing defensively.
Well, and even with all that, and they were slower to get into their offense. It took them that 10, 15 seconds to get rolling with the it was almost a quasi zone. I think more times than not, they got out of before the possession was over.
Oh,
And
no,
I
no, no.
remember
That's
one time,
exactly that's exactly what they did. You know,
it
Gonzaga would
is.
have
It's
a
just to
pass or
stall
two,
the clock a little. Yeah.
and then you guard the guy nearest you. And you know the way Gonzaga was playing, you know the bigs for Kentucky didn't have to. You know, it wasn't as if Ike was out at the 3-point line. You know, they kind of just it helped them having a matchup out of that quasi zone look to start possessions was not challenging.
No, and the length was very important. That's a big team, big grown 23-year-old men, a little bit like Gonzaga. Obviously, a lot more transfers, but there's 100 games in almost every guy that's out there. College careers, if it was elsewhere, so be it. But Jackson Robinson, Mark Pope made a comment after the game in the post game. He's had him for 2 years before, and this is his third year working with him. He's a talented kid. He's about 6'6". He's long. He's pretty quick. He's athletic. He guards. He did a nice job defensively. He tried the same situation. It was emergency. We need a point guard, or one and or two maybe have gone out at BYU. And I think they were playing Oklahoma, as Pope said. So Pope, hey, you got to play point. We don't have anyone else. We know you can handle the ball. And so the game's going on. Something happens, negative play. Running back to the bench, Robinson turns to Pope and said, "I am never playing point guard again." Pope was like, and then he said that to point out just how far he's come along this year, and especially in that role. I mean, Creasa got hurt. No Lamont Butler, which would have been very interesting. Lamont Butler is a tough, hard-nosed defender. I would have loved to seen that battle with him and Nemhard. But Robinson really, I thought, was the difference maker along with Carr. Carr was just that smart, savvy, good touch around the rim, big, good passer. I remember one play in particular where the Zags were kind of forced to step out on Kobe Brea, the three-point shooter. Ike came around the screen. The kid was open. The kid hit shots all over the place all year. Good challenge, misses the shot. And I look back in the paint, and Michael's got Amari Williams set the screen.
I remember that
He's
play.
got on the weak side Carr, and another one coming in. Dusty gets the third guy, but nobody there to get Carr. Rebound, put back, and that was in overtime. Another big basket, I think, after the Zags had got it to 1 or 2. But stuff like that happened defensively. There were just there were lapses there. You had cutters, layup, putbacks. One play, I think they had 4 shots at it before they got the tip in from Otega Owe. Just a lot of things that went wrong. And I'm kind of curious, Foxy. I like that team. I like their approach. They're not filled with NBA guys like a Kentucky roster usually is. I'm not sure where they'll finish in the SEC. That league is brutal. It may have passed the Big 12 in terms of top to bottom. But do you see Kentucky as a top 2, 3 in that league? Do you see them, in that 7-8 loss range and then drop into like a 5 to 7 seed? How good a team is that?
Well, I mean, I think the top of the SEC is going to be just a bloodbath. I mean, the team that finishes 5th could win the national championship out of that league.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I don't
true.
know. I think it comes down to health. You're going to have to win on the road in that league. I don't think it's going to be enough just to win at home. But you look at Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee. I mean, Missouri just kind of whacked Kansas. Kansas made it look respectable, but really, Kansas doesn't look like themselves right now, certainly. But Missouri's not even on the radar in that league. And I'm
13th
sure
they were picked.
yeah, I'm sure I'm missing a couple others, but so I don't know. I like their roster makeup. I like the size they have. Certainly, Kentucky. To your point, they've got a ton of experience. Once they get in a league play, they'll have a couple months under their belt playing collectively. Pope's a very, very good coach, but that to me seems like a team that is going to get better throughout the year. And if they have some growing pains, and I'm a high seed, and I see they're a 7 seed, I'm just as a staff, I'm just going to be miserable about that because I know that when they're right, I mean they're not a 7 seed, they're probably closer to a 2 seed. So I really don't know. That league is going to be a lot of fun to watch, and I think you're probably right. It's probably lapped, or rather overtaken the Big 12, as good as the Big 12 is. So, but look, I mean, you referenced that sequence where they have 3 or 4 attempts and then they make a bucket. Gonzaga has the exact same scenario there in the second half. Missed 3 3-point shots, 2 of them wide open.
Yeah,
And
nobody within 10 feet on one of those shots.
I think that was Caleb's 3. That sometimes that's what it comes down to. And Gonzaga just could not get, couldn't convert some of those opportunities. And I was really impressed with Robinson. Second half, 15 points, 6 or 7 from the field, made a 3-pointer, 3 assists, 2 of those in overtime, those long passes down the floor. I am sure Pope is pulling them aside and saying, "Are you sure about that? I think you at the point's kind of interesting for us." And you saw a couple times where against Ryan, he took Ryan to the basket and with his size was able just to shoot over him comfortably. And one of those was big late as Kentucky was looking to tie, kind of going left across the lane and just off of one foot,
the floater,
the low floater knocked it down. And Ryan's, it's great positional defense, but I'm 6'6", you're 6 foot. That's how it goes sometimes. I was impressed with Williams as well as Carr. I think Garrison's a really nice piece for them off the bench. But look, I mean, one of my takeaways, Jim, and I don't know if you felt this, was it's the first time this year where it felt like the staff did not trust their depth. That we kind of you saw them revert back to what it felt like it usually feels like, which is I'm gonna tighten this up to 6. And as well as Ryan played, he played 42 minutes. As well as Graham played, he played 35, and I don't know what he'd been playing before that, but it just appeared to me that there was a little bit of fatigue. When you're missing bunnies. If you're big, that's typically a sign of my legs feel a little heavy. Ryan's 1 of 5 from 3, I believe. Just not very effective from beyond the 3-point line, 6 of 12 overall. But if you're missing those threes, he's not a great shooter, certainly, but he's ended up shooting a decent percentage last year. I just thought it was interesting. Emmanuel plays 3 minutes. I know they're not meaningful or it's not a lot of minutes, but I thought Dusty was effective when he was out there. Made a couple threes.
I thought Dusty played well.
He guards. I mean, he should have had 8 points, but missed that that weird sequence around the basket. And they've got Emmanuel in the game, the last possession of the game. And
the defensive switch or defensive change. He's done that several times. I did it at the end of the first half too.
Yeah, but my question, and certainly this is where this is above my pay grade, and I'm sure there's. I don't know enough to know why, but when I see that, and that's not just this staff or Mark or there's certainly other programs I've seen it. I always think to myself, if the kid's good enough to guard when the game's on the line, why isn't he good enough to guard for 8 or 10 minutes a game? Versus if I have Dusty out there who's been playing and has a feel for the game, and I think Dusty's their best perimeter defender. Doesn't have the strength maybe Emmanuel does, but. So I just thought there was some of those. It just felt like they didn't trust it as much. And as good as Graham was, obviously Huff didn't have an impact immediately. But I would think the kid's got enough of a resume and equity to know sometimes you got to let a scorer cook a little bit or try to get a feel. And, Braden's not the kind of kid that needs 20 minutes or 25 minutes to get you 16. He needs, he needs to see the ball going once. So I just thought it was interesting. You've got 8, and it felt like they didn't trust the back end of that bench in the same way they have before.
Well, and probably most focused on EK. I mean, I'll go back and look at 34 minutes for him has got to be a career high here. I don't remember him, or at least pushing it.
I think in San Diego State last year, maybe he got there.
Okay. Well, and I think you're right. The longer he plays, maybe the effectiveness diminishes. Obviously got great minutes out of Ben Gregg. He saved them for a real stretch there in the second half when they could not find scoring elsewhere. I think he had 6 or 7 in a row by himself. Stromer played very well. Another shift, whether it was even just a 2 or 3 minute shift for Huff, a couple more of those, maybe Graham converts later in the game. But I'm sure those are all the things that are kind of ruminating in the coaching staff's mind. What do you do different? That's they go through the same thing that we all go through. When I write a story, I go back through what should I have changed? They're probably going through. When should I could have called this timeout or this play or sub more? But we got to move on. Let's go on to the preview of UConn, which the Zags are catching this team back on the upswing, and they had a real meltdown in Maui. They lost all 3 games there as the heavy favorite coming in. But if you take a little closer look, I mean, I think they lost to Memphis in overtime by 2. Did not play well. Memphis probably should have won it by regulation. They had pretty good control of it. Second round, they lose to Colorado by 1. Then I thought they just kind of mailed it in a blowout loss to Dayton in the final game. Obviously 1 or 2 different plays in those first 2 games, and maybe that whole thing changes and they're in the final. But so they're a little bit like the Zags. They're kicking themselves over a couple of close losses. But I think this team, they've got Alex Caravan back yesterday, the big man, 6'9"ish, very much a Watson-like player for them. And Anton Watson, he's great defensively. He can guard multiple positions. He rebounds. He hits a 3 here and there. He's a consistent, steady, kind of just leads them. To beat Baylor without him before he came back, to go into Austin and win at that building, which the Zags played there a couple years ago, Moody Center, when it was his first year, got tagged pretty hard. That's a great win. And now they're going into MSG, which is like their second home back there. They'll have a huge edge in the crowd. And they've got a roster. I watched a few minutes of it this morning. I'm going to watch the rest of it here this afternoon. They've got a roster. They've got some talent. They've got some guys who've been through the wars. The Jackson inside. Diarra, I think, is a 5th-year guy. He went into the lineup, or at least in that game. And it looked like Aiden Mahaney was maybe the odd man out, the St. Mary's transfer. He played 6. That's a season low. What do you make of this roster? And when they're right, I still think their top end will put them in that conversation for contenders for the title if they keep it together and play the way they have the last couple of days, or games, I should say.
Yeah. I may be a little
It's
less
not
bullish.
last year's roster.
Yeah,
it's not last year. I mean, those were NBA lottery guys.
Yeah, I mean, the last 2 years they've had six NBA draft picks, 3 of those in the first round. I don't know. Maybe Caravan's a late first rounder, but they don't have the same top end talent that they've had. With that being said, to my comment here at the top of the podcast, there's just so much balance and parity in college basketball, and whatever you think of Hurley. He's a fabulous coach. I mean, they are organized. They're very difficult to play against, particularly if you don't see them on a frequent basis. In other words, not in league play in a one-off environment. What they run offensively is very sophisticated. All 5 guys are involved. if you break down, that's going to lead to open shots for them. And they clearly, he's always had guys who understand that this is my job. It doesn't ever feel like anybody that he's puts on the floor is doing anything other than what he's been asked to do, that player. So they've certainly, like 25 other teams, probably feel like when we're right, we got a chance to make a run, and they've got championship pedigree. They've won the last two, and the guy at the top of the roster, Caravan's a starter on both those teams. So the guy leading the show is a guy who's been in those environments. And you look at Ball. Ball was there last year. Diarra was there. I believe the last 2 years, didn't play a ton on that first championship team, but played a ton last year. Johnson was there last year. So they've got guys who've been in those moments, and that's a really valuable thing to have on your roster. 3-0 since Maui, averaging 76 a game last 2 games against Baylor in Texas. They're not as explosive as they have been in the past offensively, but they're going to guard you. I don't. They really play 6 guys. They've got their starters. Reed comes off the bench, and then sometimes Meehan plays, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes Ross plays, sometimes he doesn't. We don't follow them enough to necessarily know why the rotation feels that way, but I just think Hurley's got the guys he trusts, and if you get a quick look, if you're Ross or Meehan, you don't have it. You may not get another opportunity really to be out there on the floor. But to me, I mean, I'm in a tough spot, Jim. I thought Gonzaga was going to handle Kentucky relatively easily, and I sure felt good about that in the first half, and then they end up losing the game. I want to say that despite going on the road effectively, I think Gonzaga is better top to bottom. They've got 8 guys. Gonzaga's got real size, and UConn's guards are not the same as Kentucky in that they're not 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". So I don't think they have the length and size to really bother Hickman and Nembhard in particular. But you just don't know. I mean, I look at Johnson and Reed; they're 2 bigs. Johnson's a thin-bodied kid, vertical athlete, shoots 83% from the field, basically only dunks. He's not a rebounder. He averages 2 rebounds in 18 minutes a game. But then he gets 2 blocks a game. Like, he's just, he's an active kid. And, then Reed comes off the bench. He's a transfer from Michigan. He's enormous. He's 6'10", 260, really strong, very good rebounder, 8 a game, 3 on the offensive glass. He's also a pretty good an active defender, 1.5 blocks a game, but only takes 6 shots, but, converts, their layups, putbacks, that kind of thing. But they don't have the firepower that they had with Klingon. Or I forget the kid, the first year they won it.
Newton.
Newton the big kid they had who was a borderline NBA guy. But nonetheless, those 2 guys are solid, but really backup bigs, but they find a way to make those guys work. So I don't know. I'll be interested. Caravan is a fabulous college basketball player. He is an all-American. I've no doubt this year, both with how much publicity they get, but also how good he is. He's very efficient scoring the ball. Shooting a career high 48% from 3. It takes about 6 a game. Good around the basket. He rebounds. He's a good playmaker. Just one of those guys. Anton's a great comp in that just fixes everything and can fill the hole every night that needs to be filled. If Ball has it going or their freshman McNeely has it going, Caravan may not look to score as much. And now he's defending, playmaking, rebounding, so on and so forth. If his teammates are struggling, McNeely was 0 of 9, I think it's against Dayton, then Caravan's like, I'm going to go get mine. He's a problem solver. He is as good a college basketball player as there is this year. So it's going to be a great game. I mean, the atmosphere is going to be amazing. But I don't know. I'm having confidence issues here making calls all of a sudden, Jim. But I think Gonzaga is a better team.
That's not like you either. I mean,
I know.
usually...
Well, I mean, both losses in overtime.
Yeah.
If you make mistakes against UConn, they're going to make you pay.
Well, they have kicked the Zags' tail the last 2 times they played. One was in the NCAAs, I think it was 28 or something they won by, on their way to the title. And then last year in Seattle, I think it was 13 was the final, but that wasn't that close a game. I thought the Zags were not in it most of the way. I
Right.
mentioned Pope's offense, how kind of different, unique it is. Hurley's offense is truly pretty to watch. They make you guard for so long and guard so many things. And it's not ball dominant. It's movement and passing and getting the right matchup. It's probably the most intricate, difficult offense to defend that you're going to come across. They get so many points in that 20 to 30-second range of the shot clock because they just kind of wear you out for 2/3 of the possession, and you're like, where's the next move? Well, I really, it is a joy to watch them. It's a little bit at the NBA level like watching the Warriors, totally different style, but you just enjoy watching it. And
I think it's great. Yeah, it's a good call.
Yeah. So I think the Zags, I think they're going to be able to score okay. They're not going to score 90, I wouldn't think. I think the issue will come down to defense and rebound. Like to me, that's the two keys with Gonzaga in every big game, because I trust their offense more. I know they only scored 29 points in the second half the other day. If they hit 2 threes, they probably win the game, and all the hand wringing is for naught. It's, hey, Kentucky played a great second half. We held them off, but it happened. They got to fix it. This isn't an easy game to fix it. They're going to have kind of the climate pledge crowd that was on Gonzaga's side is going to be the UConn crowd and more in Madison Square Garden. I think I read they've won their last 7 there. That's hard to do because they're playing big games in there. They're not playing cream puffs. So should be a great game and a great venue. Let's hit a topic real quick that I wanted to ask you about. And this is, obviously we're going to dissect every crunch time situation that the Zags are in. I think there's only really been the 2 losses, and then the win over Arizona State where they were trailing. They came back and won that game and played very well defensively at the end of that game, and obviously made enough plays to win that one. San Diego State was close. The Aztecs were close to making it a real tight finish, but the Zags were very good throughout to kind of hold them off. I think won by 13 and never got real tight. This one's going to get tight, but in those situations, and this is more of a general question because the Zags have had teams built 2 different ways. They've had the dominating scorer, Wilcher or Sabonis or Timmy, obviously, for a couple of years. And then they've had these balanced teams, the Boldens and Gray and Sacri's. There are a lot of guys in the 10 to 14 range. That's this team. They've got a lot of balance. But when it comes down to crunch time, most teams are going to throw it to their best guy, maybe give him a hand with a pick or an ISO or whatever, and he goes to work. This team, I think the closest thing they do with that would be probably Nemhard, EK, ball screen, or isolate EK mid post and get it to him and let him go to work. Is there? Does that? Am I overanalyzing it? Is there a better method or a better way to be built to handle those with that last bucket tie game? We got to have a score here situations. Can you do it with balance, or is it harder? This is general.
Yeah, no, I think you got to do it with balance. This isn't the NBA. There are examples of guys at this level that can go get theirs. And Caleb's a good example of that. I think Caleb can, in a one-on-one situation, he's going to get a shot, and he's a tough shot maker. He's not shot the ball well, 4 of 26 from 3 the last 5 games. But in theory, he would be a guy late clock. But what you're talking about is, there's 12 seconds left in the game. You're down 1 or tied, and you're inbounding the ball. What are you running? and I don't think you're running an ISO at the top of the key for Caleb. They clearly want the ball in Ryan's hands. He's such a good decision maker. Um, I think that high pick and roll is probably where they want to go with him and Graham. But that can present problems too. I mean, Ryan, as good as he is a smaller guard. I think you see that from time to time against teams like Kentucky. That's problematic. The windows are just smaller or completely eliminated on some of the passes he wants to make. And really, they don't have a lot of guys. They don't have anybody else who's going to put the ball on the deck and create. As Nolan is a spot-up shooter. Dusty's a spot-up shooter. I mean, even all their bigs are guys who want to catch and shoot. They don't want to put it down on the floor. So you got to work with what you have, in my opinion, Jim, and that's what they have. They've got a collective. They've got good depth. They've got a lot of really good college basketball players that I think make good decisions for the most part. I think you try to draw something up that has multiple actions or options, and then you let your players play. But they're not going to magically fabricate a guy who can go one-on-one and draw the defense, kick it out, or make a tough shot in the lane. Gonzaga just doesn't have that person.
You mentioned the name that I think could be a factor in that situation, and they did try this at the Bahamas. I think they had, my sinuses are going mad here. Sorry.
Well, you're good. You're good.
I can't remember when it was. It was late in reg or late in over. I think it was late in regulation. They had Battle and Hickman. Battle inbounded. There was 5 seconds or something. Don't hold me to all the particulars. They threw it to Hickman, got it back. Go do your thing, Caleb. And he kind of ran into traffic, and I think he lost the ball. I think he's a guy that could be, if option one is, and rightfully so, Nembhard has the ball because he makes the right decisions, 90% of the time. The Nembhard EK option one, I think Battle could be the second option. And two reasons. He can go off the bounce, a little bit, and he's deadly at the foul line. I don't think he's missed a free throw, and he can put some pressure on a defense that way. Whether it's a drive or get to the rim. Athletic enough to finish. You mentioned how he's hit tough shots. He's hit about 3 or 4 of those 3-point plays. Contact, flip it off the backboard high, and it goes. I think he could be a guy that, if they can get his confidence back, I think the 3-point streak has kind of rattled him, as it would with anybody. But he's got that scorer's mind mentality. He knows it's the next one goes. I'm back in my groove. I think he could be a guy that comes up big in crunch time, or at least get the chance to. And I think obviously the Zags trust him a little in that regard because they put the ball in his hands for that one.
Well, yeah, but if you remember, that's the game where they couldn't get Ryan back on the floor.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, he's very good. He's a very good right-hand driver. I mean, if you get him going, if he gets going right, he's got that ability to finish. That's certainly probably how they should look at it. Let's get our initial pick and roll action or whatever it might be, but let's get Caleb on the right side of the floor. We get stuck, it's going to him, and Caleb will make a tough shot if he can.
Yeah.
But to me, this is a team that you're asking the right question. They've lost 2 games in overtime. So down the stretch in these tight games, how are we going to score? How are we going to operate on that end of the floor? And that's what the season's for, is to figure that out. But they don't have. I just don't think they have a guy. As much as I like Caleb, and I certainly don't look at his shooting the last 5 games and think that's going to be the story of the season. He's a scorer. I don't know if his decision making is there. Where if the closeout's there, he catches it, with the defender right on him, he's now going to make a play for somebody else. I think he's very one-dimensional and focused, which is not a criticism. I think that's what makes him so good, is that he's a high-end scorers are generally exactly that, and that's what he is. So, I think that's just part of the puzzle, Jim, that they got to figure out this year. Quite frankly, is in those late game situations, what do we want to do? And that's the benefit of playing these games. And I'm still confident that they're going to figure that bit of it out.
Yeah, that's part of the process. It's a 5-month season for a reason. You got to
Right.
figure out what works, when it works, what the combos are, and that's all stuff the Zags are still putting together. And that's going to do it for this week's show. Every Monday we come to you. I will post this podcast on our website, spokesman.com. You can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Come and check us out. We always have a good time, and I think Foxy, I think we're getting better. I think we're figuring out our roles. I think we're speaking with good takes and clarity and putting things in perspective. You feel good about it, or you think we need a lot of work?
As long as we're thriving in our own mind, that's all I need. So I'm good.
Hey, I think we're doing okay. I'm going to fix my sinus issues for temporarily here, and hopefully we'll be back with full voices and lots of opinions next Monday. Thanks for joining us.